Tommy lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. He had just lost his tooth that morning, and as always, he placed it under his pillow, expecting the tooth fairy to visit. He had done this before, but something about tonight felt different. The house was unusually quiet. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. Even the moonlight outside seemed duller, casting strange shadows on his bedroom walls. Then, it started, a whisper, faint, almost like the wind, but unmistakably coming from his closet mirror. Tommy. He bolted upright, his heart pounding. He turned toward the mirror, half expecting to see his own reflection staring back at him. But there was something off. The room inside the mirror looked darker. The shadows were longer, stretching unnaturally across the floor. Tommy took a cautious step closer. His reflection moved with him, almost. It was slower, delayed by a fraction of a second. And then, it smiled. Tommy hadn't smiled. His breath hitched. His reflection's lips moved, but the voice didn't come from his own mouth. "She's coming. You don't belong here." Tommy stumbled backward, his pulse hammering in his ears. He whipped around, looking behind him, but nothing was there. When he turned back to the mirror, his reflection was normal again. The eerie grin was gone. Had he imagined it? No, he had heard it, clear as day. Something was wrong with the mirror. Tommy barely slept that night, haunted by the whisper and the strange reflection. When morning came, he hesitantly checked under his pillow. The tooth was gone. In its place was a silver coin. Relief washed over him. Maybe he had just been imagining things. Maybe the tooth fairy had come and gone like always, and there was nothing to be afraid of. But then he noticed something odd. The mirror. There was something different about it. The smudges and tiny fingerprints he always left on the glass were gone, as if someone had wiped it clean overnight. And as he leaned in closer, he noticed movement, subtle, almost imperceptible. A faint shimmer, as if the reflection itself was breathing. The whisper returned, softer this time. "She can't come here, only there." Tommy's blood ran cold. He remembered the stories, the ones parents told their kids to make them excited about the tooth fairy. But what if the stories were wrong? What if she didn't come into their world? What if she could only be seen in the mirror? A terrifying thought took root in his mind. If she could only exist inside mirrors. What else was in there with her? That night, Tommy couldn't resist. He had to know the truth. He sat on his bed, gripping a flashlight, watching the mirror. The house was silent. Midnight crept in, the world outside asleep. Then, the air shifted. His reflection blinked, but Tommy hadn't. His heart pounded. The room behind the mirror darkened, the edges of the reflection distorting. And then, there she was. The tooth fairy. But she wasn't like he had imagined. She wasn't small or delicate. She was tall, eerily thin, her skin pale as bone. Her eyes were black voids, swirling with shadows. She moved slowly, her gossamer wings trailing behind her like tattered silk. And she was looking right at him. Tommy tried to move, but he couldn't. His body was frozen in place, as if the air itself had turned to stone. Then, his reflection spoke again. "You don't belong here." "I do." Before he could react, the reflection raised its hand. And pulled. The world spun. Tommy's stomach lurched as a force yanked him forward. He barely had time to scream before everything went black. When he opened his eyes, he was standing inside the mirror. His bedroom was on the other side of the glass, but it wasn't his bedroom anymore. It was wrong. The colors were drained, the furniture twisted, the shadows alive. And standing where he had just been was his reflection, now real, now alive, grinning at him from the other side. Tommy pounded against the glass. "Let me out." The reflection just shook its head. "You're not supposed to be here," it whispered. The tooth fairy loomed behind Tommy, her skeletal fingers resting on his shoulder. "You belong to us now." Panic surged through Tommy as he spun around. The mirror world was vast, stretching endlessly into darkness. Shadows slithered along the edges, whispering, watching. He had to escape, but how? His reflection on the other side smiled, placing a hand on the glass. "If you want to leave," it said, "you have to take my place." Tommy's blood ran cold. That was the rule. Someone had to stay. He wasn't about to spend eternity trapped in this twisted world. But there had to be another way. Then, he remembered something. The tooth fairy could only exist in mirrors. She was bound to them. But what would happen if the mirror shattered? Heart racing, Tommy searched the empty void, looking for anything, to break the glass. He spotted a shard of reflective crystal on the ground, pulsing with a dim glow. Gripping it tightly, he turned to the mirror and slammed the shard against it. Crack! The reflection's face twisted in horror. No, you can't. Tommy struck again. Crack! The tooth fairy screeched, her wings tearing at the air as the shadows closed in around her. With one final strike, the mirror shattered. The world collapsed. Tommy gasped as he was flung backward, his body tumbling through darkness. He hit the ground hard, his breath knocked from his lungs. When he opened his eyes, he was back in his room. The mirror was gone, only shards of glass lay scattered across the floor, and his reflection was normal again. Tommy scrambled away, breathing heavily. Had it really happened, or had it all been a nightmare? Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. One small shard of the broken mirror, still intact. And inside it, a pair of black eyes watching him, smiling.